My name is Eleanor Bishop. Everyone calls me Nora. I'm 67 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my son's minivan pulled out of a gas station on Highway 1 with my grandchildren waving out the back window, and it did not come back. I stood there in the wind off the Pacific with a dead phone in one hand and $11 in change in the other, because my cash, all 400 of it, had been borrowed for safekeeping 2 days earlier. I want to tell you the worst part wasn't standing at that pump for 6 hours. The worst part was realizing, somewhere around hour 3, that being left there wasn't an accident at all. It was a scheduling problem. And I was the thing being scheduled around. For 32 years I was a special investigations examiner for a national insurance company. That's a fancy way of saying I was the person they called when a claim smelled wrong. Staged accidents. Inflated fire damage. Elderly policyholders whose helpful nephews had suddenly become co-signers on everything they owned. I read documents for a living. I read the sentence that comes after the sentence someone wants you to stop reading at. I retired at 60 with a good pension, a house full of case files I was too stubborn to throw away, and my husband Walter's cottage on the Oregon coast, in a little cove called Half Moon, that had been in his family since his grandfather kept the lighthouse there. Walter died 4 years ago. Heart, in his sleep, no warning. Before he went, the last thing he ever put in my hand was his old brass ship's compass, the one his grandfather carried. "So you always know which way home is," he said. "I've carried it in my cardigan pocket every day since. It doesn't point anywhere useful anymore. The needle sticks. I keep it anyway." My son Grant is 41. He owns a craft brewery outside Portland that has never, not once in 6 years, turned a profit I didn't quietly help cover. His wife Camille is a real estate agent, sharp, well-dressed, always the one who just wants to help. Her mother Deanie lives 2 streets from them and has an opinion about everything I own. I have 2 grandchildren, Tyler and Zoe, 14 and 10, and I would drive off a cliff for either of them without touching the brakes. 4 months, small things had felt off. A voicemail from my bank I didn't recognize the name on. Mail that stopped arriving on schedule. Grant asking, more than once, in that careful voice people use when they're rehearsing a question, whether I'd thought about what happens to the cottage long term. I noticed. I filed it away the way I used to file a claim that didn't add up yet. Not enough to act on. Enough to remember. Then in June, Camille called with an idea. A family road trip down the coast, just the 6 of us, Highway 1 from Half Moon Cove to Big Sur and back, 2 weeks, before the kids get too old to want to. I cried a little when she asked. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We left on a Tuesday. Grant drove. Camille rode shotgun with a folder of hotel confirmations. I sat in the back between Zoe and a cooler, and for the first 2 days it was everything I'd hoped. Zoe fell asleep on my shoulder outside Mendocino. Tyler let me win at cards. On day 2, at a diner in Fort Bragg, Camille brought it up like it was nothing. "Nora, why don't you let me hold the trip cash? Gas splits, tolls, the kids' stuff. It's easier if it's all in one place, and honestly, safer than you carrying it in that tote everywhere." I had $400 in an envelope, mostly 20s, money I always travel with because Walter taught me never to be somewhere with zero cash in your own name. I hesitated. Grant jumped in, easy, warm. "Mom, come on, it's for safekeeping. You know how you are with that bag. You know how you are." I've heard variations of that sentence my whole life, always right before someone takes something from me for my own good. I handed it over. I told myself it was nothing. A family being a family. If you've ever handed something over because saying no felt like more trouble than it was worth, and you knew, even as you did it, that something wasn't right, type "I see it" in the comments. I want to know how many of us have done that. That same night, my phone charger went missing from the outlet by my bed at the motel. Camille found me a replacement cable the next morning, apologetic, said hers must have gotten mixed in with mine. I didn't think much of it. It was a cheap cable. It charged slower than mine ever had. I noticed that too, and filed it away, the same way. By day 4, we were an hour north of a town called Driscoll's Landing, a strip of coast with one gas station, one diner, and a lot of fog. My phone was at 11%. I mentioned it. Camille said there was a charger up front, she'd plug it in for me at the next stop. We pulled into the gas station around 2 in the afternoon. Grant said the kids needed the bathroom and snacks. Camille took my phone to charge it in the store while we wait. I sat on a bench outside in the sun with my cardigan and Walter's compass in my pocket, perfectly content, because nothing about that afternoon felt like the beginning of anything. I want to walk you through this slowly, the way I would have walked through a claim file, because the way I found out is the whole story. At 2:40, the van pulled away from the pump. I assumed they were moving it to a parking spot. I watched it turn onto the highway instead, and I sat there another 20 minutes assuming, still, that there was an explanation. A forgotten item. A wrong turn corrected. By 3:30, I walked inside. My phone was not on the counter charging. It was not anywhere. The young man behind the register, a kid named Denny, said the family with 2 kids had bought snacks, asked directions to a scenic overlook 9 miles south, and left. I asked to use the store phone. My son's number went to voicemail. So did Camille's. I had $11 in coins from the bottom of my tote. No cash card. No phone. A dead phone doesn't call anyone, and a borrowed $400 doesn't get returned by wishing. I sat back down on that bench, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I got angry the quiet way. The way I used to get angry at a claim file that had been lying to me for 6 pages before I caught it. I asked Denny if I could use his charger cable, the actual store one, not the one Camille had swapped for mine. My phone came back to life at 4:15. 14 missed nothing. No calls. No texts. Not "we'll be right back." Not car trouble. Nothing. Here's where the investigator in me woke all the way up. I opened my email first, because old habits die slow. There was a notification from my bank, 3 days old, that I'd missed in the chaos of packing for the trip. Subject line, request received, additional authorized user, Bishop Family Trust account. I called the bank from Denny's phone. The representative confirmed a request had been submitted online to add Grant Bishop as a co-signer with transfer authority on the trust account that holds the cottage's insurance payout and my investment income. The request needed a second signature to complete. Mine. It hadn't gone through. Yet. I asked her to flag the account and freeze any pending authorization changes. She did, on the spot, while I sat on a gas station curb. Then I opened Camille's name in my contacts, because months ago, for reasons I can no longer fully explain except that 32 years of reading people teaches you to keep quiet backups, I had once helped her set up a shared family calendar on my old tablet, and I still had view access to it. There, sitting in plain sight, was an appointment for that very afternoon. Half Moon Cove Cottage, Whitcomb Appraisal, 3 p.m. Notary confirmed. Listing photos, Cam. Half Moon Cove Cottage is my house. Walter's house. Nobody had asked me about an appraisal. Nobody had asked me about a notary. I called the county assessor's office next, because Denny, bless him, kept feeding me quarters and eventually just handed me the store phone outright. A clerk there confirmed, kindly, that a request for a comparative market appraisal had indeed been scheduled under my address, filed with Camille's brokerage license number. If you're keeping count, that's a bank authorization request I never signed, an appraisal on my house I never approved, and a notary booked for a property that is still, legally, 100% mine. Then Denny, who had been watching my face change for the last 40 minutes, said something that split the whole thing open. "Ma'am, those 2 ladies who came through here about a week ago, the blonde one and the older one, they had a photographer with them. Took pictures through your gate," they said, "for a listing." I remember because they bought coffee and asked me the fastest way to Half Moon Cove. A week ago. Before the trip was even packed. Before Camille asked to hold the cash for safekeeping. The listing photos already existed. I called my old colleague, Ruth Calloway. Ruth and I worked fraud cases together for 11 years before she left the insurance side and became an elder law attorney. She lives 2 hours south of Driscoll's Landing, and she has been telling me for a year that if anything in my family ever felt like this, I was to call her first and cry later. I did not cry. I gave her the facts, in order, the way she'd taught me to give them. "Nora," she said, "get somewhere safe. I'm coming to get you. And I'm calling the notary to cancel." If any of this sounds familiar, if you've ever caught the truth in pieces, one confirmation email at a time, while the people who should have told you were driving further away, type paper trail in the comments. This is exactly what it feels like. While I waited for Ruth, I asked Denny one more favor. I asked if his register kept a receipt from the family that had just left. It did. 4 gallons of gas, snacks, and a bag of ice, on a card ending in the same 4 digits as my son's. Paid for, that afternoon, with money that had come out of an account I still fully control. I sat on that bench with Walter's compass in my hand, needle stuck, and I thought about how many afternoons I'd spent proving other people's lies for a paycheck, and how I'd nearly missed the one happening to me. Ruth arrived at 6. She'd already called the notary's office and canceled the appointment, citing an active client hold on the property, which was, conveniently, true the second she said it. She'd also had a locksmith friend near Half Moon Cove on standby, someone who owed her a favor from years back. In the car, driving north, I had a moment of doubt. A real one. I almost asked her to turn around, to let it go, to just wait for Grant to call and explain, because he was still my son and some small, tired part of me wanted an explanation that made all of this make sense in a way that didn't break my heart. "You can still hear him out," Ruth said. "Nothing about protecting your house means you can't also listen." I decided to do both. Protect the house first. Listen second. We reached the cottage at 8 that evening. The locksmith had already rekeyed the front and back doors, at my direction, with Ruth standing as a witness that the property was solely and legally mine. I called the appraiser's office directly and left a message revoking any authorization for entry, verbal or otherwise, effective immediately. Then I sat down at Walter's old kitchen table, in the house he left me, put on my reading glasses, and waited. They arrived at 9:10. I heard the van in the gravel drive before I saw the headlights. Grant came in first, calling my name in a voice pitched somewhere between relief and panic. Camille was right behind him, phone already in her hand, already talking. "Nora, thank God, we have been looking everywhere, we thought you'd wandered off, we called the sheriff." "You didn't call anyone," I said. "I checked. There's no missing person report. There's no call log to my phone. There's only an appraisal appointment on your shared calendar for 3 o'clock this afternoon, at this address." The room went very quiet. Zoe and Tyler stood in the doorway, and I asked Ruth gently to take them into the kitchen for cocoa, because whatever came next, they didn't need to carry it. I put on Walter's compass, out of my pocket and around my neck, where I could feel it against my collarbone. It was never going to guide me anywhere. But it reminded me whose house I was standing in. I laid 4 things on the table, one at a time, the way I used to lay out exhibits for a claims hearing. Tab 1. The bank's confirmation that a cosigner authorization request was submitted in my name, 3 days before this trip began, requiring my signature, which I never gave. Tab 2. The county assessor's record of an appraisal filed under Camille's brokerage license, for this address, 1 week before we ever left home. Tab 3. A gas station receipt, for gallons and snacks, paid for at 2:52 this afternoon, on the card that pulled away from that pump while I sat on a bench with a dead phone. Tab 4. A photograph, sent to me an hour ago by Denny, God bless that boy, of Camille and Deanie standing at my gate a week before the trip, with a photographer, taking listing photos of a house that was never for sale. Camille's voice went sharp and fast, the way people talk when the ground has moved under them. "You are twisting this. We were going to talk to you. It's not safe for you up here alone, you're 67, Grant is worried sick. Worried enough, I said, to leave me at a gas station with a dead phone and $11, while you drove to my house with a notary. Grant hadn't said a word. He was staring at the tabs on the table like they were rising out of the wood. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked in the middle of it. The brewery's underwater, Mom. I owe $40,000 on equipment loans I co-signed before I really understood what I was signing. Camille said if we just handled the cottage quietly, sold it while you were settled somewhere smaller and safer, we could fix it before you even had to worry about it. Before I had to worry about losing the house your father's grandfather built, I said. You skipped past me to protect me from a decision that was never yours to make. Deanie, who had been standing near the door this whole time, tried the last card families like this always try. This is exactly why families fall apart, everyone screaming over money, when all we wanted was to help. Nobody in this room is screaming, Ruth said quietly, stepping back in from the kitchen doorway. That's rather the point. I looked at my son, and for 1 second I let myself see the 4-year-old who used to fall asleep in this exact kitchen while his father told him lighthouse stories. Then I looked at the tabs on the table, and I said the only thing that mattered. I already froze the account. I already canceled the appraisal. I already changed the locks. This house is not, and was never, an emergency for anyone to solve behind my back. If you needed help, Grant, you should have asked me. I would have found a way. What I will not forgive is being scheduled around like an obstacle in my own family's calendar. Camille left that night. Not the marriage, not yet, but she drove back to her mother's, and from what Grant tells me now, that particular strain has not repaired itself. The brokerage she worked for quietly removed the Half Moon Cove listing photos from their internal files after Ruth sent a formal letter regarding unauthorized entry onto private property. Grant and I did not speak for 3 weeks. When he finally called, it wasn't to ask for anything. He said he'd started seeing a debt counselor about the brewery, on his own, without Camille's plan attached to it. He said he was sorry, and for the first time in a long while, the word landed like it meant something rather than like it was clearing a path to the next ask. I did eventually help him. Not by signing away the cottage. I co-signed a smaller, manageable restructuring loan, with Ruth reviewing every line before I touched a pen, and I told him plainly that this was the last time money would stand in for the conversation we should have had honestly from the start. Deanie and I are civil. Nothing more. Some bridges you rebuild. Some you just stop burning further. Tyler and Zoe still call me every Sunday. Zoe asked me once, very seriously, if I was mad at her too. I told her the only thing that had ever been true. None of this was ever about her, or her brother, or the two of them not wanting to spend that trip with me. It was about the adults around her forgetting that love and convenience are not the same thing. I drove back down to Driscoll's Landing a month later, on my own, in my own car, with my own money in my own wallet. I bought Denny a proper toolbox for his birthday, because he'd mentioned once, in between handing me quarters, that his own was falling apart. I sat on that same bench with a cup of gas station coffee and Walter's compass in my hand, and for the first time since Walter died, the needle didn't feel stuck at all. It just felt like it was pointing at exactly where I already was. If you've ever been the inconvenient stop on somebody else's itinerary, the thing to be managed instead of the person to be asked, I want you to hear this the way I finally heard it myself. Being loved and being useful are not the same thing, and any family that only remembers you when they need something signed does not get to call that love. Protect your name. Protect your paperwork. And never, ever hand over your last $400 for safekeeping without asking exactly who's doing the keeping. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe for the next one. I'll be here.